On July 4th, 1861, arguably one of the greatest presidents in American history, Abraham Lincoln, declared the American government's purpose through a speech to Congress.
To elevate the condition of men, to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, to afford all an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life.
On May 20th, Lincoln followed through, signing the Homestead Act of 1862. The Homestead Act granted Americans 160 acres of public land for a small fee. To make a claim, homesteaders paid the fee of $18, $10 for the temporary land claim, $2 for commission to the land agent, and an additional $6 to receive an official patent on the land. Another option included paying $1.25 per acre of land after 6 months of proven residency. Additional requirements included 5 years of continuous residence on the land, building a home on it, farming the land, and making improvements. Homesteaders had to be the head of a household or 21 years of age and had to certify they had never borne arms against the U.S. Union soldiers were allowed to shave off time served in the Civil War from the 5-year residency requirement. Prior to the act, the U.S. government often auctioned or sold public land in large lots that ordinary citizens could not afford to buy or manage. The Homestead Act remedied this, granting ordinary Americans the ability to buy and work these lands. However, living on a homestead proved difficult for newcomers with no farming experience. Settlers often suffered the fierce prairie winds and fires, as well as swarms of grasshoppers and devastating droughts that could destroy an entire crop field. Although land claims only cost $10, homesteaders had to supply their own farming tools. Newcomers' failures at homesteading were common due to harsh climate, their lack of experience, or the inability to obtain prime farming lands. In some areas, declaring bankruptcy or simply abandoning the land claim became quite common. Yet this did not stop the frontiersmen. Towns soon rose on the frontier with new churches and stores. Communities gathered and quickly rose to address the new settlers' need, with restaurants, barbershops, post offices, schoolhouses, and much more developing within the frontier. In the Reconstruction South during the 1870s, racism pushed former black slaves to seek refuge in the Midwest. Many took advantage of the Homestead Act as an opportunity to manage their own households through farming while forging new lives in the Midwest. Kansas became a popular location for African Americans, mainly due to being the center of abolitionist ideas. Several exclusively black settlements began to emerge in Kansas after the Homestead Act. The most well-known was a town called Nicodemus, established in 1877. Advertised to black communities throughout the South, the town steadily increased in size, and by 1880, over 100 people had settled there. However, African Americans also slowly became disheartened and disillusioned by the difficulty of homesteading, resulting in migration numbers tapered off. Between the years of 1869 and 1879, 27,000 African Americans moved to Kansas, and though few found the success they had been hoping for, a considerable number stayed, finding it a better alternative to the South. Throughout what became the American Southwest, Mexican and Spanish families as early as the 18th century engaged in land grants before America took over in the 1840s. The Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War in 1848, promised U.S. citizenship and land ownership to nearly 75,000 Mexicans living in what had just become the American Southwest. However, despite promises made in the treaty, these Mexican Americans quickly lost their land to white settlers who displaced the rightful landowners by force if necessary. As white settlers swept in, violence arose. In a few instances, frustrated Mexican Americans fought back against the white settlers who dispossessed them. In 1889 to 1890, in New Mexico, several hundred Mexican Americans formed Las Gorras Blancas, the Whitecaps, to try to reclaim their land and intimidate white Americans in order to prevent further land seizures. Whitecaps conducted raids on white farms, burning homes, barns, and crops to express their growing anger and frustration. However, their actions never resulted in any fundamental changes. Several Whitecaps were captured, beaten, and imprisoned, and others eventually came up, fearing harsh consequences against their family. In 1976, the Homestead Act was repealed with the passage of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, which stated public lands be retained in federal ownership. The act authorized the U.S. Bureau of Land Management to manage federal lands. President John F. Kennedy, in a speech to Congress, later said that the Homestead Act was probably the single greatest stimulus to national development ever enacted. The Homestead Act allowed Americans, regardless of race or gender, to live the American dream through high risk and labor. It quickly developed the frontier and communities where people gathered, which prospered to suit settlers' needs. However, the injustice done against the Mexican Americans, as well as countless stories of risk and sacrifice ending in failure, also surfaced with the passing of the act. Regardless, the Homestead Act of 1862, without a doubt, played an essential part in the American history.